What if I tell you, in one fine lazy day you find your government did some BS, and let's assume you did one post on your social media. This is BS and my govt is dumbass. Next day you go out for some rando-ass reason like going for grocery, job, college, etc., etc. Or it could be middle of the night like 2-3 a.m. sleeping sound or eating leftover snack. An ordinary but unmarked car, microbus, suddenly arrived in front of you or your home. A group of 4 or 5 men in plain clothing approach you with a question, "Are you this and that?" In the next few seconds you will be grabbed, forced into the microbus, and will end up with your hands cuffed behind your back and eyes covered with a blindfold. Destination: Aynaghor, an open, secret prison. Political opponents, whistleblowers, and you, an ordinary citizen trying to practice a basic human rights, freedom of speech. Will you believe me if I say it's not a fiction or something happened in the 80s, but the reign of its terror ended just in August 2024? Let's talk about Guantanamo Bay of Bangladesh. Why, when, and how it started. Survivors and unfortunate victims' current situation. What's happening right now with this Aynaghor situation? It all started in 2009 when Sheikh Hasina was elected as Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She had a big win back then, and everyone was hopeful for a stable future. But as time went on, the opposition started getting louder, and honestly, they had their reasons. Let's face it, even from the beginning, there were signs that things were heading towards a classic dictatorship. So, what do you think a fresh wannabe dictator would do? They'd try to silence the loud voices opposing them by any means necessary, no matter the cost. And that's where the DGFI comes in, the intelligence branch of Bangladesh's defense forces. A lot of people point the finger at them and some high-ranking government officials as the real masterminds behind this horrendous prison. They used it for all sorts of things, for personal revenge, to settle scores, and of course, to keep anyone who dared to stand up against the government in check. Though to be fair, some say they occasionally threw real major criminals in there too. When people started disappearing in large numbers and at random, rumors began to spread about a place where they were being held, tortured, and even killed. At first it was just that, rumors. No one had any solid evidence, so it was hard to know what to believe. But everything changed in 2013 when a whistleblower, maybe out of desperation or a guilty conscience, finally came forward. They started talking about a place called Aynaghor, where people were suffering from inhuman physical torture and mental abuse, and where many were being killed. That's when those whispers started to become something much more real. Everyone was in shock. Disbelief and rage were everywhere. I mean, how could a democratic country have a place like this, run by the government? No less? From 2013 to 2016, horror stories from those who had been kidnapped started pouring out, one after another. It was all over the media, even making headlines internationally. Some major outlets did deep investigations into Sheikh Hasina and her inhumane actions against these victims. But, as usual, the government brushed it off, saying it was all just baseless rumors. By that point, people were pretty much aware of what was going on. Victims' families were reaching out to the media openly, and protests were happening all over the streets. Things really took off when a prominent opposition politician disappeared one day and then reappeared a few months later, right after huge protests and a heavy-handed crackdown by the government. That case brought even more attention to Aynaghor and really put the spotlight on the government's actions. Even with the fear of the government looming over them, a few survivors started coming forward, bravely sharing their stories about what happened to them in Aynaghor. They described how they were captured and what life was like inside that place. They talked about the soundproof interrogation cells, or torture cells really, where they were held. There were 30 tiny windowless rooms with stone beds, high ceilings, and just a single bulb hanging above. A large, loud exhaust fan ran 24/7, so loud that they could barely hear their own voices most of the time. The walls were covered with carvings in different handwriting, some detailing how they were captured. Others were phone numbers with desperate pleas for someone to let their families know they were still alive and trapped in there. Those who managed to survive and return to their families often came back physically or mentally scarred. Some were held for a few months, others for years, with their families left in the dark, not knowing if they were dead or alive. There were political opponents who were kept for 7 to 10 years, sometimes even longer. Sadly, many weren't so lucky. They lost their lives in that place and will never make it back to their families again. According to human rights organizations, from 2009 to 2021, a total of 605 people were abducted, and out of those, 81 were confirmed dead. While some managed to survive, by 2021, 151 people were still missing. But good news is, if there's a night, there is a day. The recent quota protests in Bangladesh have shined a spotlight back on Aynaghor and its victims. With 15 years of dictatorship finally over, people started demanding the release of all those who had been politically targeted and imprisoned. For the families of Aynaghor victims, this brought a glimmer of hope. From August 5th to August 9th, the authorities began releasing prisoners, and many families were reaching out, holding on to the hope that their loved ones might still be alive, somewhere in those dark cells. On August 9th, the authorities announced that there were no more prisoners left in Aynaghor. If you ask me, it feels like this might just be the first chapter of a very heavy book. Sure, Aynaghor was a major part of it, but could there be more hidden places out there that we still don't know about? And will this newfound freedom really bring the transparency and accountability it promises? Only time will tell.